All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Ansible and Matrix Q&A session. My name's Greg Sutcliffe, also known as Gilvin, though I'm sure you know that already. And I'm going to be here to chat about Matrix and what that means for Ansible and the community. I'm going to probably start with a little bit of just a summary of where we're at. I wrote 4,000 plus words in one blog post and two more. Well, one more has already published and there's a third one to come. I don't blame anybody for not having the time to read all of that. It's a huge amount of text. Huge thanks to the people who have. I really appreciate it. But for those who haven't, I figured I'd give a 5-minute kind of potted version of that, just so that you've got something. And then we'll move forward. If we've got Q&A in the channel by the end of that, then I'll move straight onto the Q&A. If not, I might talk a little bit about the tips and tricks and things you can do with Matrix that are useful. Maybe some tips for IRC users coming across. That is the subject of the unpublished post as yet, but we can talk about it. And as a reminder, I believe we're planning the vote on this is going to be tomorrow, in tomorrow's community meeting. So again, hoping to equip people with the information they need to make an informed decision. So let me start with Matrix. Why Matrix? Why now? Why is it important? Why is this all a thing that I've spent a huge amount of my time on in the last month or so? In short, I think it's because it's time. We are far from the first community to make decisions around this. And we have to think about the health of the community as a whole. I am not here to try and tell people how to run their own communications. Right? That is absolutely the furthest thing from my mind. And it does not grow the community if we lose everybody by annoying them. Right? So I don't want to do that. What I want to do is to figure out where the rest of the people are. IRC is not huge. This is the second post that I did about a week ago, or maybe a little more, where I tried to sit down and look at the various sizes of different networks. And being generous to IRC as a whole, looking at netsplit.de and looking at the sizes of other things in comparison, it's generous to say IRC will be maybe 500,000 users. By comparison, other platforms are all larger, pretty much. Certainly the proprietary ones, they're enormous. Slack claims to be 45 million users, but the community has, I think, rightly ruled out proprietary tooling. I'm in favor of that. I think that's the wrong way for an open source, inclusive project to be. I do think the open source tooling is the way to go. So that doesn't leave us with a great deal of choices. XMPP, I would argue, has a similar problem to IRC in terms of the amount of exposure that I have to it and the number of people I know using it. It's still a small number. I didn't manage to get very many numbers on it because, again, it's a federated system. It's hard. There's Rocket Chat, there's Mattermost, there's Zulip. All of these are possible. Matrix is the only one that I know of that allows us to do it while healing the community instead of splitting it further. The bridges are not perfect, but they're better than nothing. And they allow us to do this without harming the existing workflows of our existing users. Matrix itself, in terms of, shall we say, addressable users, it's very difficult to filter out bridged users from non-bridged users when you look at the stats. But if you just look at sort of addressable user space, you can get varying estimates of how big the Matrix space is. It might be 3 million, it might be 11 million. I've seen numbers up to 30 million. I'm not sure I believe it goes quite that high, but certainly between sort of 3 and 10 million seems plausible. And this is a much greater addressable space of people who might come and participate in our community. Not to mention the benefits to the community as a whole. Part of this is about growing the community, but part of this is about tooling. There's a lot you can do with a richer platform. Sorry for the background traffic noise. I live on a street. So that's thrown me completely. Yes, so tooling. Richer interfaces are not only what people expect from chat platforms today, but they're also much more useful when it comes to interaction. I have had to learn this the hard way. I used to be the sort of person who would have said text was the way to go. It matters that you can communicate clearly, and things like being able to like a post or react to a post are nonsense fluff. But I have changed my mind. I have been convinced otherwise. As in my work as a community manager over the last few years, those things have been immensely important to me, and I've come to believe that they replace the social glue that we get in other non-verbal methods when we're face-to-face with people. And that turns out to really matter. So a richer platform, a larger addressable user base, the ability to do this whilst also healing splits in our community, because IRC is not the only bridge. We can do Slack bridges, we can do Discord bridges. These need to be investigated. I haven't tried them, but I know other communities are using them. Matrix also does a good job on accessibility. Mozilla were huge on this. They actually said that they would not move platforms until they got the okay from their accessibility team. It was an absolute hard stop. And Matrix won by a mile. They were super impressed with not only where it had got to, but also the devs' willingness to prioritize accessibility work. And I believe that attitude continues. I mean, Mozilla moved just over a year ago now, but I've been speaking to lots of communities, to Mozilla, to KDE, to GNOME. Fedora are moving to Matrix sometime soon as well, so I've been chatting with them. They're all doing this for various reasons, and all those reasons start to stack up. So what am I proposing? What do I want to vote on tomorrow? I want us to accept Matrix as an equal standing to IRC, and that we promote it to new users. That is, that we change our documentation and that we say, this is where you come to chat with us. You click on this link and you are chatting. Okay, yeah, you have to sign up for an account, but that hopefully is where we get to. It is very simple to jump in and chat. Initially, that link will probably take us to a specific room, whether that's the current community working group room that we're all chatting in right now, or whether that's a different room, a specific like welcome room, generic off-topic chat room. I'm unclear yet. I'm happy to take suggestions on that, but wherever it is, there'll be a room that people can jump in. They can start asking questions. That gets them some help, right? And that because there's people who don't want to sit and read docs, right? And I get that. So the ability to click a link and be chatting, within a very short space of time, I think is important if we want to get people involved. Later on, Matrix is bringing in a feature called Spaces, which is a very nice way of making like an official kind of list. It's not so different to the page we have in the community docs today, where we show off all the different IRC rooms that you might choose to join. It's just that in this case, that's within the client. Now, only Element supports Spaces at the moment, and even then, it's only within beta. But it's something that I think has potential, and I hope the Matrix Foundation take it further. You can think of it like folders, and so we can have like a proper space there. So I see that being important. I see conferences being interesting. This broadcast today is essentially a test of how I would think we might run the Contributor Summit next month. That's because when it's attached to Fest, as we saw last year, we get a much greater interest. And last year we had to use Blue Jeans Primetime in order to make sure that we could cope. But I really didn't like it. It just didn't sit. It's never sat right with me that we have to use proprietary tools to do open source conferences. And Matrix proved that comprehensively with FOSDEM last year. So the ability to run an open source conference stack is going to be nice. Now, there is a slight catch because this is obviously on YouTube, but it's the only piece left. And we were already putting the videos on YouTube anyway, right? And you can consume that anonymously, just about. And it's not like any worse than it was. You already had to go to YouTube if you wanted to catch up on the videos later. What do we gain through this? Well, all the chat will be in our IRC/Matrix rooms, so that's not lost at the end of the broadcast. At the end of the day, other people can join in later. They can go back. If they're already in the room, then they'll have the room history. That's one of the nice things about Matrix is you get a free persistent connection, unlike IRC. So they can go back in the chat history, and then they can hit up the YouTube video, and they can watch back and see what was talked about and what was discussed. And that's kind of a freebie just by having everything in Matrix. Plus, there's a barrier, right? There's attrition. We lose people. We have 40,000 people on Reddit and 60,000 people on Twitter. We have, I think, 300 people in the community room, and we get 40 people who actually turn up at Contributor Summit. And that, to me, suggests we're losing a lot of people along the way. And if we can do the conference in the room where there's already 300 people and they're curious about what we're talking about and they only have to hit up a YouTube link to find out, that, I think, is nicer. And we'll be able to keep people's interest better. At least I hope so. It'll be an interesting experiment anyway. So that's kind of my pitch for Matrix. There's more. There's a lot more. I could talk about the organizational side. In fact, I think I might, because I definitely had some Q&A earlier in the week about that. But I'm just going to pause there. I haven't had any questions in chat yet, and it has occurred to me that I did not at the start of this broadcast tell you how to get involved with that. And I can see on my YouTube stats that I have only got 4 concurrent viewers. So hi guys, I hope you're enjoying it. It would be great to hear some Q&A in the chat just to get things going. But yeah, I'm going to pause for 1 second there to let people catch up, because there is a delay between my broadcast and when you see it. There's about 20 seconds, and I need very quickly to send a message to my boss. Anyway, so I'm going to mute for a second while I just quickly send a chat, and then I will see if there's any Q&A, and if not, I'll start on my canned Q&A. No, nobody's asking questions as yet. So okay, let's go through some of the questions. So I have had, oh, hang on, I can see this is, do you remember what I was saying just now about social glue and interactions? I can see that David Samard is typing in his Matrix account right now. Now, typing notifications are a privacy interesting thing, but nonetheless, it replaces that ability to be like, hang on a sec, I'm saying something, and that's important. Right? That actually matters. I've seen conversations spiral off on platforms that don't have typing notifications because people are interleaving their replies and get very confused about who's replying to what. Whereas I know if I can see this person is typing, they haven't finished yet, right? This is the pub equivalent of them going and putting their finger up and thinking for a sec before they say their next paragraph. Right? Social glue. Turns out it matters. So let's do some Q&A. This is some of the things I've had from other people. I'm not going to name them, so if you recognize your Q&A here, I'm not withholding credit for your questions, just that I haven't had a chance to check whether you're okay being named on a public broadcast, so I'm just going to do it anonymously. So firstly, I want to talk about how the Irc Bridges work and how that looks. So the blog post I'm writing has some good screenshots in this. I was debating like a whole bunch of screen sharing for this broadcast, but I have decided that it's just going to be too fiddly. There's going to be a lot of chopping and changing, a lot of shut down one screen, open another. It's just not worth going for that. So I'm going to keep it just on me, and I'll just hand wave the whole thing. So the bridges, the Irc Bridge does a pretty good job. Some of the concerns that have been raised have been around edits, replies, and links, like long line links. So on edits, it's probably the worst one, and that we'll have to be careful at educating people on a culture point of view, because the way the edit works is the bridge will repost the whole line to IRC with the change. That's fine if it's a short line, and it's not fine if it's a very big post and you edit one character fix and repost the whole thing. That's quickly going to fill up people's buffers on IRC. So there's a cultural thing there, and I think that's just something we're going to have to educate with. I have already said in my blog post and whatever documentation we end up writing, I think it's good to consider the IRC standard of just using an asterisk and fixing the problem. So that's the only one I think where we're going to have to help culturally for people to get the hang of it. For replies, it's pretty sane. If you reply to a post in Matrix, then in IRC, it will choose one of two behaviors. For a short message that you're replying to, it will actually repost both the author and part of the message and then your reply. If it's a long message, they'll just name check the author. So it'll just get like, DM Samard, hey, thanks for that. So, I mean, I could show that maybe in a moment. Then talking about links. So for long lines, I had to really work to get the long lines to trigger. I was up to 500 words, 3,000 characters in a single message to the bridge in order to get it to trigger this. So Libera can handle some pretty long lines. But if it does, then it will convert that to a link, and that link will be on an appropriate Matrix host. So it's stored as part of the Synapse Home Server software. So you go directly there to view it. And I get why people are upset by this, but I've realized I've been told that IRC Cloud does exactly the same thing. So I'm slightly like, I would argue in any case that this is better than what IRC tends to do, which is truncating messages. And I have definitely had conversations with users in the past in my previous communities where I gave out the wrong advice because their message was truncated, and it was truncated at a point where the message still made sense. It just changed the meaning. And then I gave them the wrong advice. And that's super frustrating when you find out what's going on. So I would much rather have long lines going to a link than not appearing at all or being truncated. So that's fine. And likewise, images will be converted to a link. The one thing I would say, I might raise a bug on this one, is I think it would be nice if we could add some alt text to images when they're posted to Matrix, because then that could go to IRC to give some context. Because if all you get is a link to an image, you have no idea why I shared that unless I then add an extra line that says so, which is fine, and you can do that. But it would be nice to have alt text, and that would be an accessibility win as well. Largely, though, I've been reasonably impressed with how many good decisions the bridge makes. It's not perfect. It's something we'll have to revisit. I've said in other places that I want to see us doing retrospectives on this to see how it's going, make sure people are still comfortable with it. So yeah, we're not going to just set it up and ignore it. So that's the nature of the bridges. I'll talk a little bit about moderation. So I didn't go into this too much in my blog post because it's a little bit complicated to get across in words. I think this format's easier. So moderation at its core is exactly the same in IRC. I can select a user and ban them. Great, no worries. Or just kick them, for a bit. But Matrix has something with it that I've not seen anywhere else, which I think is really interesting. And that's the idea of federated lists for banning and kicking. Well, specifically banning people, because kicks, obviously, they can rejoin. But yeah, federated ban lists is, in Mozilla's words, a quiet revolution in chat platforms. And I can kind of see where they're coming from. It's based on the idea that you trust another community. That's the core of this. If you don't trust another community, then you wouldn't enable this, right? But let's assume we've got a set of communities that share common values and we trust each other's governance models. So when somebody bans someone in that community, we believe that that's for a good reason and it's not, vendettas or whatever. If that's the case, if you have a group of communities that share values like that, then they can have shared ban lists. And that means if community A bans somebody, that person is immediately banned in communities B, C, D, E, and so on. You don't need to know that person exists. You don't need to have it interact with them. They might not even be in your rooms today. They just won't be able to join after that. It's a way of saying if that person offends this group, they are going to offend us, and we don't want them. And that is amazing. It is absolutely incredible. It works. It's one directional if you want it to be. So an example I was given was, and I don't know if this is actually happening or whether it was just given as an example, so please be careful how you quote me on this one. But Mozilla was saying that they are signed up to the block lists from matrix.org because matrix.org permit a far greater range of behavior than Mozilla do. And so they know that if Matrix has banned somebody, they're definitely not going to be welcome in the Mozilla community. And so they can quite safely sign up that, but that wouldn't be reversed because Matrix is more permissive than Mozilla, so they wouldn't sign up to Mozilla's block list. So you can pick and choose, you can build it up. This is not something we have enabled today. It's something to be investigated for the future. And we thankfully don't get a great deal of harassment in our channels, to my knowledge. It may be that I'm not aware of it, that's possible, but as far as I know, it's not huge. And certainly the sort of levels of public spam that we get seem quite small. So I'm very thankful for that. But if we're successful at growing the community, then this is inevitability. And knowing that we have the tools to deal with it when we get there is going to be important. So that was moderation. I think I've talked a bit about accessibility already. And I think, the only other thing I didn't mention about accessibility was by doing these broadcasts on YouTube, obviously we can make use of captioning as well in a fairly easy manner. I mean, YouTube's captioning is fairly terrible, but at least it's something, and we can hopefully work on making that better as well. So that's something I want to do. What else do I need to talk about? I'm going to talk a little bit about organizational stuff, I guess. Again, if anyone wants to jump in and has questions, then do. But as I said, there's only 3 people watching, so Thank you. We'll get there. We'll get there. This will work. So, do you know what, David? I think you're still watching. If you want to jump in, let me know in the chat, and I will send you the URL, and we can have a back and forth here and test that I can bring people in and out of the broadcast, because I think that would be a good thing to do. Or if anybody else watching wants to do that, because David's the only person who's interacting. Okay, so David's up for that, and you can see because you can see that in chat. It's great, right? But I'm going to send him this in a private message, so I can do that on Matrix rather nicely, right? I can just get hold of him here. So we've got to do it all through the same platform. It would be cheating if I sent it to him in some internal manner, right? So I'm going to send him. I'm going to invite him to a chat. I'm going to send him a link, and he just needs to know that when he comes on, he'll be live right away, obviously. So careful. While we're waiting for him, then let me see what other things. So things we could still talk about. We could still talk about organizational issues and ownership of space, which is quite good. We could talk a bit about comparisons to other platforms like Slack. We could talk a bit about how to interact with IRC on a personal level. How to authenticate. So there are some. So let me mention that one. That's worth knowing. So for all that, I want Matrix to be easy. I believe Matrix will be easier to use for new users than IRC is, and that's not to say they couldn't. I'm not saying our users are dumb anyway. But hey, here he is! Yay!
Hello.
Let me finish my point, and I'll come back to you. So yeah, I'm not saying that our users are in any way going to struggle with IRC, but there are some challenges, and going to Matrix will hopefully make it easier for people. But unfortunately, due to the nature of Libera, specifically how they've got it set up, and in some cases channel configuration, sometimes you need to authenticate to Libera, and it's really annoying that we have to still deal with NixServe to some degree. But hopefully, if we set our rooms up right, at least for the Ansible community, it will only matter if you want to private message an IRC user. Which hopefully isn't so often needed, not for the wider community anyway. Right, okay, I'm going to stop there. David, how's it going?
I'm doing all right. I hope you can hear me fine.
Sounds fine to me. But we have nobody else talking in chat, right? So it's like, I hope somebody else will pop up and say hi. Allegedly, there are 3 viewers, but I think at least one of them might technically be me.
So I when I clicked on your link, it interrupted the stream in the Matrix chat room, which is fine.
If you change room, you'll lose the widgets. Yeah.
So you might have bumped down to 2 viewers.
Oh, it still says 3. It still says 3 in the stats. So okay. I don't know who the third person is. Hopefully someone's going to talk to us, but
But otherwise, it just worked. I clicked the link. I had the browser accept that I was sharing my mic and webcam, and here I am.
Yeah. Well, this is just. Oh, hey, Shrews! Yay! I know who the next person is. Are we sounding okay? Let us know if David sounds okay as well, because this is a test, right? That's the idea. So the basic architecture is that we just run a standard Jitsi setup somewhere, and we've got a particular provider, and the challenge was finding one that had both Jitsi and Jibri, which is the broadcasting element, set up out of the box. Because I didn't want to be fiddling around with self-building. But yes, I know we work on a provisioning and configuration and orchestration tool, but no, we've got better things to do, right? As the community team, we have better things to do. I don't want to have to maintain that. So I was looking for someone who could give me like a turnkey Jitsi cluster, and we found one eventually at a sensible price. And then that just means you stick your stream key into Jitsi, and it goes straight to YouTube. The downside from using Jitsi is that it only goes to YouTube. There's no configuration for other RMTP and RTMP endpoints, like Twitch or Vimeo or PeerTube or whatever, right? So cross that bridge when we come to it. We already have a YouTube channel, so I think we're kind of sunk on that one. But yeah, that's basically the architecture. Is like bring presenters in, do your presentation, everybody else is in chat, and then the history's there, and it's all good.
And I can even raise my hand. Look.
Yay! Fellow Jitster would like to speak.
Yeah, there's a little hand icon there on my screen, so it works.
Yeah.
It does lower my hand automatically. Did it?
Oh, I'll put mine up. And if I speak, does it go down? It doesn't go down again? No, it doesn't go down again. Oh, who cares? I'm not sure that that's visible on the YouTube stream anyway, which is probably just as well because that'll be speaker communication, right? So there's chat inside Jitsi as well. That won't be visible on YouTube. So again, you can use that for speaker orchestration. Like that's quite good in panel debates. I was on a podcast last week and we were using that for figuring out who was going to take the next question and all this kind of thing. So this is good. Good. Right. I'll go back to the Q&A. What other Q&A have I not covered? I haven't talked about organizational stuff yet. It's interesting, right? I was really struck when the whole Freenode thing happened as to just how brutal that felt as a community, right? It was properly nasty, and it really brought home to me the whole third-party provider problem in a way that isn't gone away, right? We're just as dependent on Libera as we were on Freenode. I mean, okay, I probably trust the Libera devs more than the Freenode devs right now, but that wouldn't be hard. But nonetheless, the problem is still there. Like you could have your community taken down because of that. Now, that is not an easy problem to solve. And to my knowledge, really the only way to do it is by proof of ownership, which is where basically DNS comes in because everything is DNS, right? So, oh, that's interesting. Badger's saying he can't connect to it on Android. Okay. Well, I guess I would tell him to use like just a standard YouTube client, but he can't hear us. So type that in chat for me while I'm talking. Yeah, the idea that we have this federated thing that has an awful lot in common with email. Maybe I should go through that at some point for people who aren't aware just how similar Matrix is to email, because it's incredibly similar. But it's the same idea, right? I have email addresses, and the only person who can take away those email addresses is the domain that gave them to me. And that's true for Matrix as well at this point. Even if matrix.org were to crumble for some reason, which seems unlikely, yeah, it's nice to know that the protocol is there, it's open, and you can own your part of it in the same way that, you know, Gmail could fall down, but SMTP would still be around, right? So it's still possible to talk to other people using the same protocol. I mean, if that happens, we've probably got bigger problems about building a community on something that nobody's using anymore. But anyway, we own our part of it, and that kind of trash fire in somebody else's area hopefully wouldn't be too big a deal in a future scenario. I mean, one would hope it doesn't happen to Libera either, and that you know, they've set up a good governance model. But I don't want to speak for Libera devs. I don't know them that well. But yeah, so organizationally, like I really like how Matrix allows us to have a stake in that, and to own it. Yeah, to own it. There's no other way to put it, right? Okay, what else do I need to talk about? Do you want me to? Shall I do the email thing? Do you think that's a good idea? What do you reckon?
I am not sure what you're on about. All
right. So I know there's a guy called Thibault Martin who's on the GNOME Foundation, and he is very pro Matrix and has been responsible for driving a lot of the Matrix use forward in GNOME land. And he's written a number of excellent blogs on the topic. And one he wrote was how Matrix compares to email, and it's just on point. I linked to it. As I said, there's this draft blog that I haven't published yet, so not very useful to you. But literally at the top of that blog post, I'm like, go and read his blog first, and then come back here, because a lot of this is going to make a lot more sense. But essentially, if you consider a Matrix account and an email account basically equivalent, a Matrix message can be considered to be an email. You send something out, and it goes to a variety of people, and a room is essentially a thread. Right, so you've got a number of people in the thread, and you send a message out, and it goes to all the people on that thread. That's not too far away from how Matrix actually works. It's obviously a little bit more nuanced, but in terms of how it operates, that's a pretty good mental model to have. And then everything else flows from it. And I don't just mean like text message, right? If you react to a post, you're still sending a message. It's the equivalent of an email +1. In fact, I know if in GitHub you respond to an email in GitHub with just +1, it will convert it into a reaction, for example. So it's the same kind of idea. And that then leads into a lot of other discussions. What does it mean to have multiple Matrix accounts? Well, what does it mean to have multiple email accounts? You might have one for work. And that then leads us into the whole debate about Ansible.im and what we do with those accounts, and why we wouldn't necessarily have open registration on them, because, well, you wouldn't give out work email accounts to anybody who wanted them, right? There's a responsibility to represent the domain that those email addresses come from, and the same is true of matrix accounts. Because of that federated system, you don't just get the ability to ban users, you can ban whole servers. And I would not want people banning Ansible.im from their, from participating in their things because people are misbehaving, right? So I'm very careful, because once we open up open registration, it's really hard to take it back again. This is where GNOME find themselves today. They're having to close down a lot of accounts and explain to people very carefully about why they're doing that, how they're doing that. And I'm really, really wary of having to do that. So yeah, that worries me. But it does mean we were left with this big chunk of matrix accounts that I don't know what to do with, because by the time people know us well enough to, like, if we do like a vouch-based system, that's the proposal, where people come and ask us for a matrix account and they kind of have to be vouched for by some other members of the community. Well, largely by the time we know them well enough to answer that question, they've probably already got a matrix account anyway. It's like it's this circular thing. I've got 2 accounts because I like this idea that I can ignore the work one when I'm not working. I think that's much the same as email, and that will become a lot more natural when we have decent client support for multiple accounts, in the same way that I've got K9 Mail on my phone, and that can do multiple accounts, and I can ignore one of them, right? And as soon as I can do that on Element or some other client, then this is going to feel a lot more natural. There is a couple of clients that already have multiple account support, but they're desktop clients, and they're definitely not ready in other places. I tried out one called Mirage last week, and it's really nice, but it's also really rough in places.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was actually wondering the same thing. I already have a Matrix account, and I happen to have an Ansible.im account that I haven't really used, because I have found myself in the situation of having 2 accounts. So do I keep one for work and one for personal stuff? And like, how do I manage that? So it's the email analogy, I think, is good here. Yeah, I have a personal email, I have a work email, and I can choose, one or the other. I don't know how we will end up, distributing Ansible.im accounts down the line, if we do. But writing some policy around, with great power comes great responsibility. Was once said in a great movie, or a great cartoon. But anyway.
No, I'm with you on that one. Yeah, I think the email analogy really helps, right? To answer the raw question in there isn't a great deal of reason to switch, right? There's no difference between those accounts, with two small exceptions. So the first exception is how it is viewed. At the moment, it's very hard to see what domain people come from. Like, I have to hover over you and have a look and see what Sorry, I've got a message from somebody who wants to join, doesn't know where we are, so I'm just going to send them the link. So yeah, I think it's very hard to understand where people come from, but there was a thing in Matrix a little while ago called Flare, and it was attached to their idea of communities, and you could attach Flare for various things, and domain could be part of that, right? So there was a flare that showed when people were coming from Freenode, for example. So you could see IRC users right there, with a little icon right next to their name in the chat. So you knew right away this was an IRC user, and it was pointless reacting to that post, right? So Flare may well come back. I think it is likely. It isn't there today because it's attached to communities, and this new idea of spaces has replaced communities, and they haven't managed to port Flare across yet. But I can see us attaching Flare to Ansible.im to denote like a core like community space, because we're only giving these accounts to people we have vouched for. So there's a cachet there, right? If you get if you were a user come into the channel, you ask a question, you get 2 conflicting answers, and one of them's got the flare, you're probably going to trust that a little bit higher. The other system, Discourse does this with automatic power levels. There's ways of denoting like seniority and so on within a community. So that might be something that plays into the domain space, but it's not there today. And the other thing is that if you are creating new rooms, if you want to add an alias for your server, you need to have an account on your server. Right? So only people with accounts on Ansible.im can add Ansible.im aliases to a room. And it's a very small thing, but it needs to be that server. And likewise, if and when I ever manage to get Ansible.com as a matrix domain, which I'm trying to get, then we'll have a very small number of admin accounts that can add Ansible.com aliases to a room, because those will be highly official in some sense, right? So you wouldn't be giving those accounts out to like anybody. But that's the only two situations, like room aliases and directory stuff, and then whether or not like people are paying attention to the domain in terms of who they trust. Beyond that, there's no limitations on who can participate in the community, right? You can use any matrix ID. So that's fine. If you don't want to go down the 2 account approach, don't. It's fine, right? I think that it's a very personal decision.
Is there, so I ask this question as someone who is obviously not as good in matrix protocol and stuff as you are. So is the server open to any federated ID, or does it need to be from matrix? So pretend I have my own home server that's on domain abc.xyz. Can I join without any restriction, or?
When you say join, are we talking join to a particular room?
Yes.
Yes.
Like, does it need to be federated over matrix, or?
Okay, so I'm not sure I'm following the question. So our servers are part of the larger federation of matrix. So as long as your home server is part of the federation as well, then yes, you can join our rooms.
Okay, so I guess that was my question. Like, if I have my own server at home, it needs to be federated for me to join.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
So the way Matrix is architected is every home server that takes part in a room gets a copy of the room. That's basically how to understand it. So you have to be part of the network in order to get that copy of like the room's state and join it and be a part of it. If it is quite possible, and a lot of people do run unfederated matrix instances just for their friends, but then you can't leave that server and go anywhere else. And then there's private federation, which is a whole other thing. So Matrix Foundation and Element make a lot of big noise about like big government deployments and stuff like that. And you can bet there's not one server, right? But it's like 150,000 departments using it or something.
So they can have like their own federated cluster without necessarily being bridged to
without being public. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's pretty flexible. I mean, I'm pushing my knowledge of like the protocol at that point, but I'm fairly sure that's how it works. But we are part of the public like mass matrix network. So in general, if you're part of that too, you can come join our rooms. It doesn't matter where your home server is. That's fine. And again, that's very, very email-like, right? I can have a Gmail address, you can have a Hotmail address, but we can still talk to this forum over here. So it's fine. So yeah, that's how it works. Right, I'm going to check back and see if there's got any other questions. Mostly it's about Badger trying to get YouTube to work. But that's okay. I'm just going to have a look through some of my other chats to see if any other things came up. So I talked a bit about accessibility already. I talked a bit about Slack with a few people and how it compares to Slack. And I guess, I don't really know Discord, but I guess you do. So I guess a comparison to modern chat platforms might be relevant. Certainly in terms of my limited experience of Slack, the two things that I would call out are, one, Matrix doesn't support threads. I consider this a win, frankly, but I think they are working on it. I remember reading Element's blog post of like what's in the next year for them, and I think I saw threads on there. So that's something that may well come if you like threads in your chat. How that will look over an IRC bridge, I have no idea, but we'll see. The other thing that I think is worth talking about is we're coming back to accounts again. Obviously, the thing with Slack is that you've got to create an account on every separate instance. And then what they do is a nice bit of UI magic to merge all of that into a single client. So they do multiple account really well, but then they've designed multiple account as the way Slack is meant to work in the first place. So obviously the UI supports that. Matrix, of course, goes the other way around and says, well, we're just going to federate everything, so you only need one account, and you can just join everything from there. So it's a bit 6 and 2 3s, as we'd say in Scotland.
In that sense, it's probably more similar to Discord, where you have one Discord login and you can join N servers, and then once inside those servers have channels. So it's fairly similar to how Matrix spaces are implemented. In fact, like it reminds me of that.
So that makes sense.
And they just implemented threads, I think, maybe a week or two ago, because the threads were not a thing in Discord until then. So It turns out threads are complicated. I don't know.
Technically, Matrix already supports threads. It's all the clients that don't. So they did a thing last year where they basically did this horribly hacky proof of concept replacement of Twitter using Matrix as the back end. And of course, to do anything like that, you need threads, right? So so they did it and it worked. So clearly, threads is possible to some degree. But yeah, there's no real sensible implementation of it yet. So yeah, that's a fun one. But yeah, you can do a lot of things with the Matrix protocol. They've done all sorts of hacky stuff. They did video calls over it. I think 2 FOSDEMs ago, they did a VR call using Matrix as the mesh network for it. So that was pretty interesting and very, very rough around the edges, but it's pretty cool to see. But this is no longer about Ansible. So yeah, it's fine. I think that's all I've got here. What are we on here? We're 40 minutes in. So this is probably, 45 minutes is probably a sensible stream length. I can see Badger's writing something, but he's been typing for apparently the last 10 minutes. So I don't know.
So I have I have a question. So I'm looking at the live stream right now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, in fact, never mind. I answered my own question. So I was wondering how Jitsi switched from you to me or both at the same time. Kind of how in BlueJeans or in Google Meet you might have several panes. I was wondering how configurable that was or how it worked. But
yeah, I don't know the answer.
To me, so
it's loudest speaker, I think, gets the video. I don't know how to force it like I used to. So I used to do quite a bit of presenting on YouTube via Google Hangouts when that was still a thing. And then the presenter could choose whose video was being displayed. And I don't quite know how to force that in Jitsi. We should probably test that in a private video stream at some point, try and figure it out. But for today, it's working fine. I think mostly it's fine because that's probably what you want. I think when you're presenting, obviously the presentation gets camera anyway, so that's fine. Sadly, I couldn't get OBS to do my virtual cam thing today, so I could put text on the screen and things like this. It was being a pest. I decided it just wasn't worth the effort for a simple Q&A session. So that's a shame. I'm going to call Badger. Oh, so go on.
I just wanted to say there is a Jitsi watermark at the top left, and it carries over to the YouTube stream, and I think that's fine too.
I think that's fine. It's an open source project. I'm happy to advertise it. It's not a problem. But I'm just reading what Badger's saying here about different experiences. So it's a different experience with people watching the YouTube video widget in this channel via Matrix and people just viewing the normal text chat. Maybe we shouldn't embed into a normal use channel as a regular thing to avoid splitting the audience. I don't know. I mean, maybe you could tell me what you mean by normal text chat there, because I'm not sure if you mean normal text chat in the room and then watching YouTube in a different tab, or whether you mean like the YouTube chat, which is disabled or should be disabled. I'm pretty sure I turned it off. So yeah.
So when we join the Ansible community channel on Matrix, the widget, the YouTube widget is there at the top. You cannot miss it, right?
I did that.
Yeah. So maybe that's what he means by dropping the YouTube chat. We're kind of splitting the conversation. I don't know.
No, he's typing, so we'll see. But this is what I like, is the fact that we've got the chat there. It's working like you would in BlueJeans or Meet or something. We've got our chat, but it's not lost at the end of the conference, which is what I really dislike. It works really well.
I could see this working for the Contributor Summit or some other events, right? Yeah. But I also remember asking this question about whether we should have a dedicated channel for it, right? Or just use.
Well, I don't have a good answer. Anyone who everyone in the channel who isn't watching YouTube is only getting my half of the conversation. Yes, okay, that is fair. I'm conflicted on this one, because part of me is absolutely, let's put this in its own room. And I think the minute you have a conference with multiple tracks, you obviously have to do that, because it just doesn't make sense unless you've got a prime stage and then break it. Who knows, right? But there's a part of me, and it's a slightly shady part of me, that thinks that if people are getting confused, they should just join the stream, right? It's if people are what's going on? You're well, we're doing talks, come and join. Because part of the challenge here is, or part of the intention is that we're clearly losing people. Oh, all right, no, are we clearly doing it? That's an assumption. I believe that having to register through Eventbrite and then join either BlueJeans or Google Meet costs us viewers and participants, and having it in the room where there are like 300 people allegedly would hopefully boost participation. But that only works if you don't start a new room, right? Otherwise, you do start a new room and there's nobody in it, and you get the same 20 people in it, whatever. that might happen, right?
So that makes me think, when you watch streams sometimes on Twitch or other places, and they're streaming a video game or whatever, they embed the chat in their stream, so you can watch the stream and see the chat at the same time. Does that make sense?
That would solve the problem for people who are only watching the video, and it would be great for playback as well. But it doesn't solve the problem for the people who are only in the chat room.
Yep.
So yeah, but I mean, it's something to talk about. We've got a month or more until the Contributor Summit, so we can play around with this and decide. And like, nothing has to stay fixed, right? We try it for one conference, and we try it for a different conference. The problem I have with embedding the chat is it's dependent on one person. So what I've been trying to get away from is everything's dependent on me or Carol or whoever being there for the whole day, which, to be fair, probably will be, but it's a big ask to force it, right? If you want to may want to step away and so on. So this is like, if I wanted to just stream to YouTube and be the linchpin, like I wouldn't need a Jitsi cluster, right? I'd just host everybody's video streams here and then send it to YouTube from OBS. But I don't want that. I don't want to make that about me. That's not how this should work. And as soon as you start having to like overlay stuff, that's outside of what Jitsi can handle, right? And then we're back to one person having to handle the stream, which is okay, but not ideal. So yeah, we can. And it's possible that you could do that in post-process for the video. So you could download the live stream, and then when you render it, you could have the Matrix chat played back on top or something. It wouldn't be so hard to do. But again, there's ways to solve it. We can play around with it. We can get people's feedback on what works. I'm happy to do that. I just would like a solution that doesn't involve one person being permanently fixed, especially if we start running longer events, right? So we know the presentations day is going to be a standard kind of conference day, but I think the training day is planning to be over a longer period of time, right? So now those will be a different format anyway, but you can imagine if the conference part got longer, then asking one person to handle all of the streaming it's just not going to work. So yeah.
So what you're saying then is there's no built-in way to do it in Jitsi, so you would need something like OBS and then an implementation in OBS to overlay the channel. I agree.
Yes, I agree that, because the only way you could do it would be to screen share someone's Element client, right? And then nobody else is screen sharing their slides or whatever. So yeah, it's tricky.
Okay, so something to explore. Let's go.
It's definitely we can improve it. We can definitely improve it. And I mean, I feel like even if we just go to a separate room to keep it simple, then that's fine. We're certainly no worse off than we were, and we're on a more FOSS-related stack. And so that's already an improvement, and then we can experiment with different ways of making it even better from there. I ran a conference in June, which was 1 hour a day for 5 days, and it was absolutely brilliant to have everything in Matrix, but it was a dedicated Matrix room for that. But it just meant we had that persistence between sessions, and people could talk. People who hadn't made the session for that day could watch the YouTube video and then catch up before the next day and so on. It worked really nicely to do multi-day events and bring everything together. I like that the training day could well make use of the in-person and the in-room broad meetings. So we can create a bunch of breakout rooms, and Matrix itself embeds Jitsi, but you can still get the URL out of that for the people who are not on Matrix. So that's fine. And then you've got like a bunch of small Jitsi sessions where everyone can sort of see each other and pair program or whatever, which will work quite nicely. And we can experiment with other things. I don't know if you've joined it to the room yet, but we've got a poll bot that works. So we haven't had a chance to try that today, and we're running out of time. I should have prepared some polls ahead of time. But in theory, we have an IRC-friendly poll bot, which allows us to do polls like we did in Google Meet. So I think all the functionality we need is there. This has been a pretty nice test. Yeah, I hear what Shrews is saying. It's worth people knowing that that you will lose the stream if you click away from the room in Element specifically. But then I think well, you can always load it in a tab. I've got multiple sessions of element open, so that's another way of doing it. But yeah, it's just different, right? I don't know. It's tricky. Oh, what's that? Someone sent me a text message.
No, so I was testing what it did if I wrote a chat or something in Jitsi.
Right. Yeah.
I guess it didn't show on screen, and you would only see it from the.
And it's only for the
interface.
presenters. Yeah, it's only for the presenters as well. It's not going to pick up the Matrix stuff. I mean, so it's worth knowing that Matrix has a full REST API. So in theory, you can write whatever integrations you like to pull out what's going on in the channel and do something with it. But I think the limitation here is Jitsi and what it can support. When you look at what streamers are doing, they're using OBS directly, right? And then you can do anything. You can do whatever you want at that point. And that's where we're limited, is trying to make it not dependent on a single person. Okay. Anything else? Oh, so go on.
No, I don't have any other questions myself. I'm going to take a look at the room and see if someone else has some.
I think Shoes and Badger have been giving us some good feedback, and it's nice to have some chat with people in there. And it's nice to be able to bring people in and out. So like I brought you in halfway through the stream. That was good to test. That's how I see most presentations going, where you've got like a moderator and a presenter. And then maybe if someone asks simple questions we can take from chat. I tested earlier. I reckon the latency is around about 15 seconds, which is not too bad for having to wait for questions. And obviously we get the typing notification, which helps as well. You can see that people are going to be like, oh, I've got a question. And then, that's interesting. That's really weird. I would have expected that to go straight to YouTube. Sorry, for the people watching this later, Bird's just saying he gets 403 for popping out the widget from Element, but I don't know the answer to that. I would just, frankly, if I'm not going to watch it in Matrix, I'll just load the YouTube stream.
In fact, I was about to suggest trying to pop out the video player to see if it would still stop when you change room. It would be like a kind of workaround.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can send
something to investigate.
Yeah, I can totally kick the MSmart out of the video stream. I do it now, just to prove it, and then we're going to wrap it up. Thanks, David. Right, let's see if I can kick you. Hang on, where are you? There you are. There you are. Kick you out. Aha, he's gone. Yay, there we go. Cool. Okay, this has been fun, and got some nice interaction, and it's a nice test of all the things we're hoping to use in September. So thanks, everyone, for your comments and your feedback. I hope this goes well. Obviously we've got the vote tomorrow, so that's going to be fun. But yeah, I'll be around. I'll be in the meeting tomorrow for further Q&A, and beyond that, have a great afternoon, and I will see you when I see you. Bye-bye.